All right, so I would like to start off by saying some applications of large networks. The first application is modeling cell, genes, proteins. For example, protein-protein interaction is a very popular approach. Even in machine learning, there are some approaches that we can handle protein-protein interactions. And so modeling metabolites, modeling proteins, genes, cells, and all of them in biology can be considered as a kind of modeling large, very, very large networks. The second application is internet, network of routers, computers. The third application is a network of web pages. And the fourth application is network of infection spread. For example, how coronavirus is now spreading. Spread of biological or computer viruses. The fifth application is food chain webs. The sixth application is portfolio management. So in portfolio management, you can consider each node as a portfolio of assets. So each node is just a portfolio. For example, this node is a portfolio of having, for example, Euro USD, for example, Amazon. So each node is just a portfolio is just a portfolio of some assets. And this approach is quite new, the next application is just human collaboration networks, citations. For example, you have seen Google Scholar. Each person has some. You have seen the citations. You can see the articles, how articles authors are related to each other, and all of them can be considered as a network of human collaboration. The eighth application is social network. In social networks, for example, Facebook, you do link prediction. So their engineers are active in developing some algorithm for link prediction. And it behaves, it behaves like small world topology. The other application is community detection. And it is a typical problem in network theory. In network theory, in mathematics, we call it graph theory. So the next application 9 is network of words. For example, I go there, for example. But, for example, in word to vec, we associate a word, for example, a chair, to a vector of some numbers. So word to vec, for example, so to each node we have a vector. And so because we think in terms of words, so these words are now connected and it makes a graph, a complex graph. So in NLP, natural language processing, you can see the words as the nodes of your network. Very, very large network. And the next application number 10, could be, for example, network of proteins, amino acid sequences. For example, they create some proteins. And there are many open sources, many websites in the internet. You can find it that, for example, this protein is similar to another protein. This one is another to other proteins. So we can see the graph of that and how global structures such as chromatic number they affect some local structures. For example, formation of a triangle, formation of some communities. In network theory, people talk about different concepts such as centrality. In graph theory, in we talk about, we have some parameters that are important for us. For example, chromatic number, the click number, and the gears, the minimum number of edges that form a cycle. And so we have lots of global and local parameters. And more importantly is the network of neurons. So neurons in brain, because brain, people have understood that it has a small world organization hubs and modules. So it is a very interesting things to study. So you have seen 11 different applications, but applications are much more than that. And so how do you deal with billions of nodes, billions of neurons, billions of cells, billions of proteins or genes? And of course, it's just millions of genes. And so, for example, social networks, we have maybe 4 billion people. And so how do you deal with that? How do you find some patterns in a very complicated network? So a mathematician should work with a computer scientist. They cannot work separately because we need lots of complex algorithm and based on some foundation. For example, when I say foundation, it means that you need to know extremal graph theory. Extremal graph theory, which is my favorite. You need to know how to create expanders. For example, recently some computer scientists have developed some new kind of expanders that is very interesting. And you need to know maybe some Ramsey theory, but it is not essential, but it helps a lot to understand. You need to know graphones, graph limits. So you need to read the books of Lowas, for example. You need to know spectral graph theory is popular in machine learning because it's easy. You compute some Laplacian eigenvalues, eigenvectors of some Laplacian, and you find a spectrum, and you think that real world is as simple as this small size matrix and just finding some eigenvalues. But you should be very clever to extend this theory to billions of nodes. So it depends on how pragmatic you are. And so the prerequisites for all of these paradigms, let's say, is that the basics of graph theory. You should know the basic definitions of graph theory. You should know some theorems in matching. You should read the book of Driscoll. Very nice book on graph theory. We'll work on connectivity, some theorems on connectivity, some theorems on coloring, vertex color and chromatic number, and many other things. So you have seen that each of them takes a lifetime to become an expert, but you can see the relationship between them. For example, random graph. Random graph is invented by people, Hungarians, such as Erdős, so you need to know the relationship between different subfields of mathematics, and computer scientists here they play an essential role because they can connect different ideas, and they can create some sophisticated algorithm so that every theorem could be algorithmic as well. And this is the idea behind computer science. If a problem is NP-hard, you solve it. You try to find just simple problem. Ignore the complex one. Just you find a simple problem and solve it, and then you try to kind of extend it. And so First, if it is, and for example, it is NP hard, you find a very simple problem, and then, for example, which is at most a polynomial, and then you extend it. So I would like to introduce extremal graph theory, because if you understand this, then you can understand many other fields as well very, very quickly. So extremal graph theory, but before you understand extremal graph theory, you should understand matching, connectivity, and coloring. So let's see what is the motivation behind the extremal graph theory. The global parameters of a graph are edge density. So edge density is the total number of edges divided by the number of vertices, choose 2. And the chromatic number, these are global parameters. Chromatic number is chi. And these are global parameters. And I ask you how global parameters can influence its local substructures. Or I may ask you how many edges do we have to give a graph on vertices to be sure that we have, for example, a graph contains a KR, the complete graph subgraph for some given R. So local means, for example, some community, some cluster. So from global things, we want to force some local structures. And the mathematicians, graph theorists in Hungary, they use the term force very much. So the idea is that from very global parameters and restrictions, such as chromatic number, we want to see how can we force some local structures. For example, formation of a triangle. These are local structures. A community, a cluster, a kind of cluster. And so let's talk about subgraphs. So if the cardinality of H is less than n, which is the greatest possible number of edges that a graph on n vertices can have without containing a copy of H as a subgraph. And for example, will G be unique? For example, does your graph contain a copy of H? H, for example, your H is just this triangle. Does your graph contain a copy of that? And we say, yes, we have this copy. So these are the problems that we ask in extremal graph theory. For example, a graph H, which is not a subgraph of G, you cannot find H in G on n vertices with the largest possible number of edges, is called extremal. So when I say extremal of n vertices, I mean the size of the order of your graph. So this is the cardinality of G and the H. So in other words, we want to see the maximum number of edges that G doesn't have a copy of H. And you should know that when I say G is extremal, it's different than G's edge maximal. In fact, I can say that G is extremal for some. These are relative things. You should say for what? For some edge. If G is extremal, then G is edge maximal. So H doesn't have a copy. G doesn't have a copy of H. But the opposite is not true, because your graph could be edge maximal, but you can find some copy of H in G. So you should take care about this point. And so just the definition of G is edge maximal with a given property. If G has the property, but no graph with F a superset of E does. For example, H is your complete graph, and all complete R-1 partite graphs are edge maximal. For example, this is three partite. For example, R partite, and R is now 3, so it is 3 partite. And so the question is that which among these have the greatest number of edges? And the solution is that those whose partition sets are as equal as possible. I mean, differ in size at most 1. So you may ask that, for example, in edge, in complete graph, all complete R-1 partite graphs are edge maximal without containing a copy of KR. If V1 and V2 are two partition sets with V1 minus V2 greater than or equal to 2, we may increase the number of edges in our complete R-1 partite. So we have some nodes here, but they don't have an edge inside each of these independent sets. By the way, these sets are independent sets, because this vertex and this vertex don't have an edge. So there are another one, for example, this one and this one are some vertices in this independent set. So now we have 3 independent sets. And then the R-partite, for example, 3-partite, is that all the connections between them. And this is the motivation for a great Hungarian mathematician, Turan. I mean, most of the fundamental things about extremal graph theory is based on the work of Turan. And that's why many other people like Erdős were interested to know more about it. And then people like Szemerédi, who got Nobel Prize, all of them are motivated by the work of... So understanding Turan's theory and is very important. Because, for example, Mantel is a special form of Turan theorem, Mantel theorem. And so understanding Turan theorem, Turan graphs are TR-1 of n. And so they are unique, complete R-1 partite graphs on n vertices. And whose partition sets differ in size by at most 1. So when I say Turan 3 of 8, it means we have 8 nodes, and we have 3 partite. For example, this is we have 3 independent sets, and they are connected. So this one is connected to others, and this one is connected to others. So this is the so each of them are independent, and if H is a KR H3, and the Turan of R-1 of n is Kn. And so we have some, for example, the number of edges. Let's start by an example. We say that T R-1 of n is extremal for your complete graph. And we write by so the definition of extremal number is clear for you because I've just defined that. And now this is just the number of edges of the two-round graph. So let's prove the two-round theorem.